start, thank you everybody for coming along to this event this afternoon, which is Surrogacy in the US, Why Your Agency Matters. Very, very warm welcome. Just to let you know, we are recording this event, and as is the way with so many things nowadays, lots of people will tune in afterwards. So if you are tuning in afterwards, we're making this available when it's been recorded and edited. Then welcome to you, and any questions or anything at all that you have, please fire them through to us. For those in attendance now, please make sure that you keep yourself muted if you're not speaking. We have a couple of speakers, and also keep your video off as well. And towards the end of the presentation, we'll have an opportunity to answer any questions. So please do put those in the chat, and as we go, we'll have a look at those, and hopefully they'll be addressed during our speeches anyway, but if they're not, we can certainly circle back on those at the end. So today we're going to be talking about surrogacy in the US, and specifically why your agency choice matters. For any intended parents looking into the right options for your own personal circumstances, it's key to be properly informed before making any decisions. So today we're going to talk about the US as a pathway for surrogacy, and why it's so popular for so many people. And we're really lucky to have Nazca Fontes from US surrogacy agency ConcieveAbilities, who's going to be talking through how your US agency fits in, and why the choice of agency really is so important. And we have the added bonus of one of Nazca's colleagues, Gina Marie, who's Director of ConcieveAbilities Legal Services, who was also going to just be around to answer any questions that come in from a very specific legal perspective at the end, so we can circle back to her, of course, as well. So please do feel free to ask any legal questions too. Firstly, just a brief introduction to me. So my name's Stephen. I'm one of the team here at Brilliant Beginnings. I'm a dad to 2 children through surrogacy and egg donation myself. And my partner and I were very lucky to be able to find 2 amazing women to help us on the being our surrogates, but also an egg donor as well. And we have a lovely little boy and girl now who are now 8 and 6, which is crazy because I don't know where that time has gone, but hey ho. At the very start of looking into surrogacy to have a family, my partner and I found getting information about the different options, the different routes, was really, really tricky and quite tough, and at times was quite overwhelming as well. So hopefully today we'll give you a little bit of information around the US to help with that. When looking at surrogacy in the US, it can often feel that way as well, but it really doesn't have to be. My role at Brilliant Beginnings, along with the team, alongside my colleagues and our sibling organization, NGA Law, we're here to really help intended parents navigate each stage of the journey, including at this early stage, and make the process as seamless and joyous as possible. So to start with, let's have a look at why the US is a popular destination for surrogacy. It's a very, very well-established destination for surrogacy. There's very well-established organizations, they're ethical, the majority of them operate in an ethical way, and they screen and prepare their surrogates really, really well. There's also a huge availability of donors, so there's a big availability for people who need help of an egg donor. There's time considerations, so in many instances, a surrogacy journey in the US can be a lot shorter than it here is in the UK or elsewhere. And also there's legal safeguards. Important to note that coronavirus has had a big impact over the last couple of years, but it certainly seems to be in the process of subsiding now, as with many other things in life when thinking about coronavirus. And a lot of intended parents now are deciding to move forward after waiting over the past few years. But there has been a little bit of a surge of intended parents now interested in pursuing surrogacy in the US, but there has only been a little bit of a slower return to the number of surrogates inquiring and offering to help intended parents as a surrogate. But that being said, it's definitely getting better, and I think Nazca could probably speak to that when she tells us about how ConcieveAbilities work and the current situation there. And it is certainly quicker than it is in the UK as well. So first of all, what I wanted to do was just talk about some of those reasons before handing over to Nazca to talk about how your agency can help with all of this. So the first thing to think about is the law and how that fits in with not only the UK, but how it actually operates in the US as well. So in the UK, we have a process to resolve legal parentage called the parental order. And for the majority of intended parents that pursue surrogacy in the US or in any country for that matter, the parental order will be the route that they take to resolve the legal parentage. The UK recognizes that whoever gives birth to a baby is the legal parent, so the legal mother. And if she is married, then her husband or civil partner would be the other person on that birth certificate. The process in the UK would then be a post-birth process where the intended parents, although assuming care of the baby and being with baby from the outset, would apply for the parental order. And what the parental order does is it looks at a number of criteria and essentially establishes a new birth certificate with the parents on there instead of the surrogate. Now, in the US, although the UK law doesn't apply there, UK intended parents do still need to think about this because they're going to be based in the UK and there is no global surrogacy law that means that what happens in one destination is the same as in another. The good news is that the US is very well set up for surrogacy in relation to the law. It is permitted in the majority of states, although the US surrogacy laws are determined state by state. So it is important at an early stage just to make sure that you're looking at states where surrogacy is permitted, particularly when looking at your individual circumstances as well. Either NGA law or ConcieveAbilities will have lots more information on this if you wanted to explore this in more detail. But ultimately, the thing to hang on to is that there is a process here in the UK for you to follow, which is reasonably straightforward, but with some extra help, it can certainly be a lot easier from a UK attorney or my sibling or colleagues at NGA law. And likewise, in the US, it's important to make sure that you have a good understanding of the surrogacy law in a particular state, but also how that fits in with things like gestational carrier or surrogate agreements, or agreements with your egg donor if you're having the help of an egg donor as well. But very happy, all of my colleagues will be very happy to have more of an in-depth discussion around that. And Gina Marie is here to answer any questions today as well, if there's any questions that you have during the course of this event. Another reason for pursuing surrogacy in the US is the availability and choice of egg and sperm donors. That definitely is an advantage over the UK. There are far more egg donors coming forward in the US, partly because it's far more well established in the US, but also because they have the ability to be compensated as well. So there is a financial incentive, although egg donation still comes from a place of altruism. This definitely helps that there's an element of compensation as well. What that means for you as an intended parent is that you have more choice than you would do in the UK. UK egg donor programs particularly are usually very clinic focused. There's often quite a large wait for an egg donor. During the pandemic, you could see the wait for an egg donor of being 9 to 12 months. And then when ultimately presented with an egg donor, the choice might not be exactly what you were looking for. Certain criteria can't even be stipulated. Whereas in the US, there's lots more choice. There's an availability of looking at a number of profiles, for example, depending on the route that you take. There are clinic programs, there are agency programs, there are also frozen egg banks. Again, all of these choices can be hugely daunting, but what we do at Brilliant Beginnings particularly is often help intended parents navigate these choices and also think about some of the longer term things as well. So are they looking at securing enough embryos for a sibling journey, for example? And that can really inform some of the decisions and thinking around the choice of egg donor quite early on. For example, has the egg donor got previous donation history, in which case that can be a good indicator of how many eggs she might provide for a future journey for when they might cycle with yourselves. So a number of things to think about there. But definitely a big advantage for UK intended parents who require help of an egg donor and or a sperm donor in the US over the UK. Another big reason that intended parents choose to go to the US for surrogacy is that it is hugely well established, and this is usually reflected in the organizations that help as well. So when we're talking about clinics and agencies and attorneys, many of them have been operating for a number of years, like ConcieveAbilities. And that means that they really have honed their process. They know what they're doing in terms of each section and part of the journey for you. So there's a few key pieces of the jigsaw to consider when looking at the organizations to help you. So we've mentioned the US agency, and Nazka will talk more about that. There's also the US clinic for the IVF process and the US attorney as well. So those are the three key areas that intended parents need to think about. There is a huge amount of choice. So I mentioned that many of these organizations are well established and been around for a number of years. There are some that haven't as well. So finding the right ones can be difficult, but it's really important to think through carefully what the right ones would be for your individual circumstances. One other thing to think about is that you can start off the process early on with both the surrogacy agency and the IVF clinic. So what we do at Brilliant Beginnings with the intended parents that we're helping in the US is make sure that those things are starting off at the same time, because often there will be a wait for a surrogate. And alongside that, intended parents can be either looking at moving their embryos or creating more. What that means is that whilst they're doing that, the wait for the surrogate is ticking over. By the time their embryos are ready, hopefully there won't be too much longer to wait before being matched with a surrogate and the process there starting with treatment and a pregnancy. So you can have those things starting at the same time, and it's really important. You also need to identify a US attorney ready for when the legal elements are needed. And for UK intended parents, it's really important to have legal advice from a UK perspective early on, and then loop in at various stages of the journey, UK legal advice to make sure that when you have ultimately come to the parental order stage, that everything is where it needs to be and set up, and that's as seamless as possible as well. So my colleagues at NGA Law do a huge amount of work with our intended parents at each stage of the journey to do that. When looking at which organizations are going to be helping you, it is really key to look at your needs and priorities as a starting point for that. For example, how long do you want this process to take? Is time a huge consideration and priority for you? Are there areas of the US where it would be easier for you to base yourself when it comes to baby arriving? Do you have family or friends or work commitments to a particular area? That can inform some of the decisions over particularly the agency and where they recruit their surrogates from. Less so from the clinic perspective, unless it is a clinic and you need to go to that clinic for your own IVF. But if you're having the help of an egg donor, the location of the clinic can be a little bit less important than potentially some other aspects. Your budget, how does that fit in with the different organizations, and is it achievable and realistic to go with a particular organization if their fees and the compensation that the surrogate will receive are out of your range? So those are important things to think about early on. It's really important to also do a little bit of work around getting to know the organizations as best as you can before moving forward. At Brilliant Beginnings, we've done that work for you, and we will handpick some particular organizations that we know are tried and tested and will work well for your circumstances. But if you're doing this outside of an organization such as ourselves, really important to get as much information as you can about the organization. And in doing so and having an opportunity to meet with them, you'll be able to not only have a proper discussion about how they work, make sure that it aligns with some of the important things for you about the screening and preparation of the surrogate, how long it's going to take to match you, but you'll also get a good sense as part of that about how they communicate with you as part of this as well. And the agency is important because they're going to be with you for a long time. They're going to be with you for the majority of this journey. So we'll give you a good idea of how they communicate as well. And that can mean different things for different people. Some agencies might be more transactional in their approach to communication. Others more homespun, warm, friendly, all very professional, but for some people, they prefer one over the other. Also talking about the clinic, I mentioned geography less important, but there are things that are important to consider with a clinic. For example, if you need the help of an egg donor, is it helpful to find a clinic that has its own egg donor program as a starting point? Is that egg donor program suitable for what you would be looking for with an egg donor? That can often be reflective of the local area. So if there's a clinic in a particular area, you need to look at the demographic and the types of egg donors that they bring onto their program. Also, as I said, in terms of IVF, obviously things like success rates, these are things that do offer a little bit of an advantage again over the UK and the clinics here. The processes for IVF and particularly experience of surrogacy are still ahead in the US over those in the UK. One thing that runs across all of the organizations is you also need to be comfortable and have knowledge that they know how to work with international intended parents. There are many organizations in the US for surrogacy that are very good at what they do, but when adding in the dimension of international, that can be a little bit too much of an ask, and it can just undermine some of the elements of what they offer. So important when you're having these discussions to ask them about their experience of international intended parents too. Obviously, these are things that we've done, the organizations that Brilliant Beginnings works with, they'll all have a tried and tested track record of working with international intended parents. The final element of the puzzle in terms of making the right choices at this early stage is that these organizations have also worked with each other. Your surrogacy agency will communicate a lot with your clinic. Your clinic will communicate a lot with your egg donor agency if you have one. The attorney will loop in at various points as well. So these are all important things as well. And we obviously don't want to upset it or break anything here. And if there are organizations that work well, then we want to make sure that they also work well for intended parents. We want to make sure that they work well together as well. Now, obviously, big part of this, as I alluded to just then, was that the agency is a massive part of this. And that's one of the focuses of today, is really important to find an agency that fits in with you, how they communicate with you, how they screen, how they match as well, because that can vary, how they actually present surrogates to you and go through that matching process. The agency really is with you from start to finish. So with this in mind, I'm going to hand over and introduce Nazca. And just to introduce Nazca, ConcieveAbilities, much loved agency by us and our intended parents. And Nazca's the CEO of ConcieveAbilities. She founded ConcieveAbilities 25 years ago. Initially as an egg donor service, it's grown to be really successful, well-regarded, full-service agency focused on many aspects of family creation, and helps create families all over the world, has lots of experience working with UK intended parents. Nazca is always looking for ways to make the service and offering at ConcieveAbilities really exceptional, including working with the best partner organizations, as I mentioned. That's really important. At Brilliant Beginnings and NGA, we really love working with Nazca and the team, because how they look after their surrogates is amazing. Their donors, they have an egg donor program as well, and of course our intended parents. So it's my pleasure to hand over to Nazca, who's going to talk through how ConcieveAbilities can help you and support you on your surrogacy journey.
Well, thank you, Stephen, for that lovely introduction. And it's a pleasure to be here to discuss surrogacy here in the US. As noted, we have been in practice. We've just entered our 26th year. So we are one of the oldest and largest providers of egg donation and surrogacy here in the United States. And we have, quite a lot to offer. But my presentation today is really less about ConcieveAbilities and truly more about how a good agency can help shepherd intended parents through a rather complex process of surrogacy and egg donation if needed. Partnering with the right agency really optimizes outcomes and leads towards successful journeys. So I'm going to talk today about really the key steps to managing a journey. And I think that there are three important elements to consider when identifying the right agency partner. A good agency is going to do three things for you. They're going to identify a healthy, qualified surrogate. They're going to match surrogates with intended parents in a way that aligns on key criteria for both parties. I always like to say both parties need to say yes and consent to the match. And then the third facet is really effective management of the surrogacy journey. So you'll hear me use the word journey a lot. And what that really means is shepherding both the gestational carrier, surrogate, and intended parents through the process, all the way to, a successful delivery. So how do we go about in America identifying a healthy qualified surrogate? One thing to consider when partnering with your agency is how and who is performing this surrogacy of identifying, screening, and matching. So when we think about the recruitment and screening, a good process means a lot of education given to the surrogate so that she can make an informed consent, so she understands the road ahead. A good provider will review a surrogate's obstetrical and medical records to ensure that her previous deliveries have been relatively uncomplicated and quite healthy. All surrogates do come to this process having already had at least one child and are currently rearing a child in the household. They need to go through psychological screening and assessment by a licensed mental health professional here in the United States. They need to undergo background checks, both financial, criminal, civil, to ensure that we're working with a woman who is not under any undue and unnecessary financial or domestic stress. Her partner certainly included in all of this screening. So when we assess a surrogate, you need to be sure that the person who's running that assessment really has the qualifications to ensure that the surrogate is doing this for all the right reasons and she's healthy and committed to the process. A lot of folks like to ask, what are the surrogates really like? Why do they do this? Well, after nearly 30 years of working in the field, I have a unique perspective about these surrogates. And one of the things that we can underscore without a doubt is that the surrogates are truly motivated for the reason that has to do with inspiring joy and giving back to others. There's a thread of altruism that really runs through all of them. And while there's some secondary motivators to them, by and large, they want to give joy, they want to provide this service. And almost always it's because they know somebody in their life who has experienced difficulty or challenges in building their own family. And so that's a primary motivator for them. Obviously, they need to be financially stable. The average household income here in the United States of a gestational carrier is over $75,000. So while compensation and money plays a role in a surrogate's journey, it's not a primary motivator. Most of them have a college education, and they certainly all have a very well-rounded support system around them. So they're really unique women, and they're coming at this for all the right reasons. The other key element to a successful journey is the matching process. And, I often say a little bit tongue in cheek that it's a lot like a first date. When two folks get together, they really are trying to put their best foot forward. They're assessing each other, they're testing each other out. And there's some similarities in matching intended parents with gestational carriers. So what a good service provider will do is they will really talk to the intended parents in depth about what it is that they're looking for, what they view as important in the selection of a surrogate. There are a few issues that really are necessary for a successful journey. Paramount is communication. So when looking at working with a surrogate, we like to find out how each individual person in the arrangement approaches communication. The frequency, the style, because going through this process is one where both parties have to develop over the course of time a strong relationship that's built on trust. And that doesn't happen overnight. Folks don't come out of the gate with this. It really is something that takes time, it takes attention, it takes cultivation. So how and when folks like to communicate lays the foundation for that relationship to grow. So a good professional agency will really explore the underpinnings of communication. They'll explore lifestyle choices. They will explore how folks would view the care of a pregnancy, the medical providers involved in the pregnancy. So there, at the end of the day, there's a bit of art and science and a lot of focus on what we like to call shared decision-making. So the most important issue to address, as I mentioned, is communication style and frequency. It is a focus on this shared decision-making, and it's also a focus on shared values. Now, obviously, these things are not going to be very apparent to each party at the beginning, but an agency will help cultivate this along the way and ensure that they can play the role of intermediary should things get bumpy, should obstacles arise, should issues come into play that need good, strong resolution. And, if you've got a good relationship with your surrogate, chances are those issues will be resolved in due course and in a speedy way. So moving on to the third component that's really an important one is the journey management. And again, who is going to be managing this journey for you? As Stephen suggested and spoke about in his introduction about a US-based surrogacy agency, and that is one where they are truly going to play a role in looping in all of the ancillary professionals involved in this process. You do have the IVF clinic. You do have the reproductive endocrinologist within the IVF clinic. You have the third-party nursing team that is going to help triage and arrange all of the necessary important components that lead to a successful embryo donation. You're going to have the attorneys, both based in the UK and based here in the United States, working on drafting a very solid gestational surrogacy agreement between the intended parents and the gestational carrier. You're going to have eventually the obstetrician and hospital and the administration of the hospital. You're going to have an escrow agent who's going to manage the funds that get paid out to the service providers in a surrogacy journey. And you're going to have psychological and mental health professionals. You're going to have insurance companies working on this. So there are a lot of complex issues to manage, risks to mitigate. And, I love the word jigsaw puzzle that Stephen used. That truly is the case here. There's a lot of moving pieces and parts that have to click in just right and just so for this to be successful. So an agency is going to manage what I like to call milestones. So all of these providers have their role to play in the milestones that lead from, from the matching process all the way to delivery and recovery. So those milestones are the embryo transfer, the pregnancy and management of that pregnancy, and then delivery and recovery. So the embryo transfer, I mentioned the IVF clinics, the doctors, the third-party nurses. So we will work to ensure that the surrogate is getting the appropriate care with the IVF clinic, that there's a lot of communication taking place, and we are all strategizing and organizing the workflow to get to the embryo transfer process. If the embryo transfer is successful and a pregnancy is achieved, the next milestone obviously is pregnancy. And it really is an exciting time. We work to get that surrogate transferred to her obstetrician for her prenatal care. We liaise with the intended parents to ensure that they are in the know every step of the way, that they have the ability to communicate with the obstetrician. They know the status of the pregnancy. And of course, that appropriate communication is taking place between the intended parents and the surrogate at all times. We also are instrumental in what I call kind of sub-milestones within the pregnancy. That is the 20-week ultrasound and then the birth plan. Those two events are punctuated at the 20-week and the 30-week mark, respectively. The 20-week ultrasound is midweek through the pregnancy. It's an opportunity to all regroup together with the hospital, make sure that the fetus looks good and healthy, and then begin planning the roadmap to delivery. Fast forwarding to 30 weeks and developing the birth plan. That's when we come together once again and ensure that all parties know what the plan is going to be, what the day of delivery should look like. You know what we say about the best laid plans, but certainly we do our level best to ensure that all parties have an understanding of what the day of delivery should look like. And then finally, moving on to delivery, which is the third milestone in pregnancy management. Working hard to delivery is a wonderful moment in time. It can be certainly anxiety provoking for many folks, particularly if you are abroad. The agency will help make plans for you to come over when the time is right, help get you settled, and make sure that you have the things that you need once that baby arrives. What's really unique, and here's where I'll veer off just a little bit to talk about the recovery of the surrogate and why that recovery period is so important to all parties. ConcieveAbilities is a bit unique in that we put a lot of emphasis on what we call the fourth trimester. That period of time post-birth after the confetti drops and the balloons are gone. We've all achieved our common goal together, and intended parents return home with their baby, but it's an opportunity for us to really double down on our effort to ensure that the surrogate feels well supported and that physically, psychologically, and emotionally, she is healing appropriately and that she has the support that she needs during that, rather sensitive time. So we like to call that here at ConceiveAbilities a fourth trimester endeavor of caring for her. So understanding too, in that part, that the primary motivator for a surrogate during this entire process is not only to inspire joy and to give back, but she really wants to feel connected to her intended parents. Her and her family have sacrificed quite a bit in order to undertake this endeavor. And so the more intended parents can be aware of that and figure out ahead of time how much they want to continue to have a relationship with her. The vast majority of matches continue to have some type of ongoing relationship. And it runs the spectrum. It can be a relationship where it's, a note or a card or photos during the holidays, or it's something stronger and more enduring and long lasting where they have a lot of communication within their lives. Sometimes that begins to wane as the years tick by. But understanding how you'd like to approach a longer term relationship with your surrogate does also tie into some of the matching alchemy that I talked about previously. So it is important to think about, when all is said and done, what the relationship might look like going forward. So, recapping on those milestones that I talked about, it's the milestone to embryo transfer, the pregnancy management and delivery. And then, of course, holistically, it's recruiting and screening a qualified, healthy surrogate. It is matching on fundamentals like communication, shared values, and shared decision-making, and then the pregnancy management. So a really good agency at all times is going to have their focus on maintaining progress towards those milestone goals, removing obstacles, and certainly minimizing risks. So putting the right professional skill set on every one of those tasks is an important one. So always ensure that you're asking potential agency partners who is working on those particular milestones along the way. You should never feel like you're the ones micromanaging your match from a distance. I know that being abroad carries with it a particular set of concerns. Naturally, you're not present here on site at all times. So you should never have this feeling like you don't know what's going on. You don't know what might be around the corners, what your lookouts are, as I call them. You should know exactly where you are and what action steps might be coming. Of course, it's not to say, as I mentioned, obstacles don't arise. They do and they will, but a good partner will help mitigate those and minimize them and get you back on track. So experience absolutely matters in these situations. A good agency, of course, will provide you with timely and important updates and information at every step. And there'll be also, like I mentioned, that liaison to all of the ancillary professionals involved. And they need to really support the framework of the relationship. while not being an actual conduit for communication, they are the intermediary to make sure that sound communication is taking place. So we can help provide both sides with the tools to help make that possible. A good agency will also ensure that the mental health is looked at in a surrogate. A surrogate should be in monthly support groups. She should have direct access to a mental health professional should she need it. And of course, her questions and concerns should always be addressed. So those really all the hallmarks of a good agency. There's lots that we could go into and talk about at a more granular level. But I think for the purposes of this presentation, the information that I've just provided helps to compartmentalize those important steps along the way and gives you some high-level insights into the macro work involved, while a lot of micro work certainly takes place behind the scenes. So with all that said, I can certainly take a pause and see if there's any questions, or certainly, Stephen, if you felt that I've missed anything that might be of particular interest to your audience, I can certainly cover that as well.
That's really helpful, Nazka. You make it sound so easy, and this is the hallmark of a really good agency that have thought through all of those elements that you've talked about in detail. And yes, there's a lot more to go into, and we could spend all evening talking about this. But yes, I mean, from an intended parent's perspective, and just for those attending and listening to this in the future, checking that your agency does these things is really key. And yes, some of them some of them might not, but you need to make sure that you're happy with, if there are areas that aren't covered in quite as much depth as Nazka has covered off with an agency, that you're comfortable with that. And yeah, because not all agencies will do it in the same way, for sure. But please, yes, do, if you're online now, please submit any questions and we can cover those off at the end. What I'll do first, Nazka, is just sort of run through the last bits of the process for getting home and things like that, and then we can circle back on some of the key things that many intended parents are asking at the moment in terms of waiting times, those sorts of things. But hopefully we may get some questions in as well, some more questions in as well. So thank you very much. And if you are watching this as a recording and have any follow-up questions, then you can get in touch with us. Just email us at hello@brilliantbeginnings.co.uk, and we can answer the question directly, or send that through to Nazka and the team at ConcieveAbilities. So there are a few, we spoke at the beginning about why the US is a compelling destination for surrogacy, and I think that there's been a few things that we've spoken about along the way, but there's a couple more points that I wanted to cover off. First of all is just to give you some information around getting home. So when baby is born, I think a lot of intended parents sort of think, okay, well, that's great. Well, what's the process for getting back to the UK? And there is a tried and tested route in the US whereby intended parents, as they are the parents from a US perspective, when baby arrives, they apply for a US passport, usually for their baby to travel back to the UK on. And that can take a good few weeks, depending on a couple of things: the legal process in the state where baby has been born and whether that's post or pre-birth, and also general availability of the passport office, which has been a very hit and miss during the COVID times, but seems to have stabilized a little bit. So you can anticipate that post-birth, 6 to 8 weeks waiting for a UK passport to travel back on. There are alternatives in terms of applying for a UK passport, but that can be a little bit tricky doing that before you've gone through the UK parental order process. And then obviously once home, the UK legal process, which will probably already be in motion at that point, can go through, and that can be quite lengthy, depending on whether you're having help from a UK attorney to just help navigate some of those. International surrogacy and parental order hearings are in the High Court, so there is quite a high level of evidence that the judges are going to be looking for, but nothing that's unsurmountable, and certainly with help from a legal professional, these are all things that can be well navigated. Another compelling reason to go to the US that we haven't touched on in a huge amount of detail is the timing. So I mentioned around surrogate match definitely going to be quicker than it is in the UK, but potentially in terms of the embryo creation process as well, that can be a little bit swifter because you're not waiting for an egg donor. And in terms of success rates, obviously, the less transfers that it takes to achieve a pregnancy, that's going to help with timeline as well. And for many intended parents that are approaching surrogacy in the US, they will have been on a significant journey to get to that even thinking about that. So by the time they've got to this point, they really want things to move forward quite swiftly. What we generally see, and this is variable a little bit during COVID, but 18 to 24 months from the point that you sort of say, yes, I'm ready to go, I want to move forward in the US, to baby arriving is still not unrealistic. And I would see that starts to sort of come down a little bit to when match times start to stabilize a little bit in the US. So that's a big advantage as well. In terms of budget, because this is an important question to cover off, and it wouldn't be right to talk about the US without talking about budget, we do advise at Brilliant Beginnings to have a starting budget of around 160 to 180. That should allow for a lot of eventualities, but just to break it down, you have agency fees, so a surrogacy agency, and an egg donor agency if you're having the help of an egg donor through an agency. There's surrogate compensation and expenses. There's egg donor compensation if you're having the help of an egg donor. There are the clinic costs for creating embryos and obviously for helping your surrogate get pregnant, the transfers of those embryos. There's US legal costs. There's UK legal costs. There's also insurance. So the surrogate will need to have insurance which covers her care, but also because the baby is going to be the intended parents are responsible for the costs for newborn cover as well. So that's usually by either an insurance policy or negotiating directly with the hospital. There's also travel and accommodation, which is obviously hugely variable depending on whether intended parents want to make a number of visits to the US or whether they're just going to focus on a few, and also whether those visits are at Airbnbs or hotels or whether they're with friends and family, which can obviously help reduce the costs significantly. So that's a little bit around budget as well. And there's lots more information on all of this on our website, on brilliantbeginnings.co.uk and NGA Law. At Brilliant Beginnings, our aim is to, as I said at the beginning, to try and take away as much uncertainty around these things as possible, and certainly to help with navigating some of those initial choices of agency that can be hugely helpful to intended parents. Just to make the point that the organizations that we do work with, such as ConcieveAbilities, it is based on their reputation, the experience of working with them, that they operate in an ethical way, that they have international experience. It is not based on referral fees or anything like that. We don't work on commission from any organizations, and it really is about the right ones to fit in with our intended parents. For us, it's really amazing to see intended parents at the beginning making these initial choices, as I'm sure it is for Nazca and her team as well, starting off and giving them hope, but then seeing them all the way through. And that's one of the unique things that we get to see at Brilliant Beginnings, is that process from beginning to end, and often the opportunity to meet the babies once they come home. You also have the option, of course, of working with organizations such as Nazca's without Brilliant Beginnings help. There's obviously more work that you'll need to do in terms of making sure that the organizations you choose are the right ones for you. But NGA Law, our sibling organization, can definitely help in terms of the legal side of things for reassurance at the outset, but also obviously the parental order side of things as well. So please do get in touch if there's any information that you want from us in relation to any of those things. So with that, I think we'll open up to some questions. So one question that we had, Nazca, is around surrogates' vaccination status and what you're seeing. It's quite a timely question around coronavirus, and in reality, what are you seeing there in terms of surrogates?
Yes, great question. So it's a bit of a complex one. What we are seeing is that the vast majority of IVF clinics here in the United States now require surrogates to be vaccinated. The reason being is that obviously that is in accordance with the CDC guidelines, but also with the American Academy of Obstetrics and Gynecologists, which do say that pregnant women carry an increased risk when contracting COVID. So, increased risk meaning poorer outcomes to the pregnancy and to the baby. So once the ACOG came out with their recommendations that pregnant women should receive the vaccination, most IVF clinics in the US followed suit. So it is a requirement. We are seeing that there are sometimes exclusions made to that on behalf of certain intended parents with clinic approval. But by and large, due to the fact now that most clinics require the vaccination, it has decreased the pool of available applicants. We found when that requirement came out in August that right away about a third of applicants were refusing the vaccination. And so that really cut into the availability of gestational carriers.
Yeah, and very much in terms of the evidence still is very clear around this, and as time progresses it may well change, and I think as organizations we will remain alive to that, but we have to follow with the evidence as it is and the risks around that. But thank you for that. And just to, I suppose I mentioned earlier around the number of surrogates, intended parents has picked up post-pandemic. Number of surrogates, what are you seeing there from an organizational perspective?
Sure. What a timely question. The New York Times actually just published a very big article about this issue. We were surprised to see the New York Times pick it up, but there is a dearth of surrogates right now in the US. We could attribute it to any number of things. We really don't know if there's one particular root cause, but what we can imagine is that the pandemic has offered up a whole host of issues that are very complex that young families are facing. Women are now home with children, they've left the workforce, schools might have been closed. And so even though we've begun this process of opening back up as a country, I think young families are really still trying to figure it all out and trying to assess the right choices for them in a very upended environment. So the applicant pool is absolutely down. If we have this webinar even a year ago, we would have been able to quote intended parents approximately 12 weeks of a wait time. Today, we're quoting 12 months. Now, I will say that as a company, we've never had more surrogates. We have never been more effective than we are today at recruitment and screening. It's just that the demand has surged so much that we still are not keeping up with the influx of intended parents. So the key takeaway, I think you all heard, about 1 year.
And I think this is something that is very movable, but I would imagine, and what we're seeing working with other organizations, is that time is stabilizing and certainly starting to go down rather than potentially going up even further. So fingers crossed for that. But the one thing to point out there is in terms of a comparative with the US and the UK, there is no doubt that the US is going to be a quicker route to finding a surrogate. Many of the organizations here in the UK are just not able to move intended parents forward at the moment. Whereas in the US, you would have the advantage of establishing yourself with an agency, making progress with the clinic. Alongside that, the wait will be ticking over. And then as I mentioned right at the beginning of the conversation, around making sure that these things are running in parallel, so you're not doing one thing and then waiting for another thing to happen. Thank you, Nazca. So one question that we've had submitted is around embryos. So the question is, my husband and I have already produced embryos here in the UK using a donor egg. Is it possible to transfer those embryos to a US clinic to pursue our surrogacy journey in America? Now, in theory, yes, it should be possible. There are a couple of things that many clinics in the US will want to check out in terms of FDA regulations and seeing if exemptions from the normal process, as it would be when creating embryos, happens in the US, which will probably not have happened in the UK unless you've preempted that and done all of those things alongside creating the embryos. But in theory, yes, you should be able to transfer those embryos to a US clinic. Maybe some US clinics are going to be more receptive to that than others. And there's also the other side of it with the UK clinic in terms of their willingness to export embryos. And this was something that as an organization, we found early on in the pandemic when nobody was able to travel. So in terms of depositing sperm, those sorts of things, there was a real reluctance in the UK to facilitate depositing sperm in the UK with a view to getting it exported. But a lot of work that we've put in terms of getting clarification from the HFEA has made those things a little bit clearer, and hopefully for clinics, they shouldn't be worried about those things. Nazca, I don't know whether your experience, particularly when embryos using a donor egg here in the UK, what you would advise there?
Yes, I find that it is very clinic specific. I think that we'll find, hesitancy on behalf of certain clinics and, being more receptive in others. So it really is on a case by case basis. And as you noted, the FDA issues loom large. For those in the audience that don't know what that is, in America, we have the Food and Drug Administration, and they have guidelines that we must follow that relate to tissue donation, and the testing of embryos do fall under FDA regulations. So there's a lot to look at there. Yeah.
A final question, please do submit anyone that's currently attending. Is there any, Nazca, question for you in terms of the impact on budget? Is there any specific things that you would sort of say, this is something to just be mindful of as an intended parent? There are lots of variables, and you spoke around those, but is there one thing specifically you think would be important to flag up?
Absolutely. I think that there's a lot that can be earmarked within a budget that is relatively stable. You can get advance notice on your legal fees, on your IVF cycle fees, on what it will take to compensate a donor, for example. I think the biggest moving target has to do with how many embryo transfers are ultimately needed, and with how many gestational carriers or surrogates. I think that tends to be a moving target that intended parents don't really anticipate. Sometimes that first match is not the match that ultimately goes the distance. And so you might have to get rematched for a whole host of reasons. And you might have to undergo more than one embryo transfer. And so each surrogate and each embryo transfer adds up. And those costs are variable.
They are. And part of what we do at Brilliant Beginnings is sometimes look at organizations that offer a little bit more certainty around some elements of that. So there might be clinics that have specific programs that say, look, with the help of an egg donor from a specific program or that we approve, there might be a little bit more certainty over, yes, we've got the confidence that we'll work until we achieve a pregnancy because of the circumstances there. And likewise with many of the organizations, including ConcieveAbilities, around rematching with a surrogate, there are some certainties that you can build in there, which really helps. Other organizations may not work like that. So again, that's important to just sort of work out, okay, the premium might be, the fee might be slightly lower at the outset, but what is actually built in there? And if things go awry, is there going to actually be extra costs overall? So it's an important thing to think about. Difficult to work through, but if you've got all the information and you do your research, then they're very doable, and there are organizations that can help to minimize the impact around that. Okay. Anything else from you, Nazca?
No, I think this has been a wonderful opportunity as we all get to re-engage with the as we call it, cross-border opportunities together. We have worked with Brilliant Beginnings for such a long time, and you do a wonderful job. And we absolutely adore working with the intended parents. And I will say that surrogacy in the United States has come a long way since I first started managing this process. And there are so many protections afforded here in the US that are not elsewhere in the world. So it may be done less expensive elsewhere, but we always caution at what expense in terms of risk. So just to acknowledge the protections afforded here in the US is really an important thing to underscore for all of us.
Absolutely. And thanks so much for speaking today, Nazca. And thank you for attending as well, everybody. And if you're watching this as a recording, Thank you for watching. And if you do have any follow-up questions, then please just fire them off to us. What we will do is follow up for those that did attend today with a recording and some details on our next event that we plan to run in the coming months. With that, I'll say thank you very much. Have a lovely evening, and we'll see you soon.